24 frames per second or 30 frames per second? What is the proper frame rate that you should be filming all of your videos in? That is the question that I ultimately want to answer with this video. Now, I did a test on my Twitter. So I uploaded 2 videos, 24p in a 24p timeline and a 30p in a 30p timeline with the correct 180-degree shutter rule. Now, when I did this test, I didn't say what I was looking for. I just asked what shot looks better. And it was interesting the results that I got. It was fairly split. However, it was pushing more towards shot A, which was the 30p footage. It was about 60 to 40%. Now, personally, I made a choice a long time ago to switch to 30 frames per second. And almost every video that you see on my channel here is shot in 30 frames per second. Now, the reason that I did this way back when I first started my channel was actually because of my production company. So my company mainly shoots fitness video production. That's our niche for video production. And when you see people working out in 24 frames per second versus 30, it's almost jarring. Like, it's hard to follow the 24 frames per second. But when you're shooting 30 frames per second, all of a sudden the movement becomes much smoother and it's easier to follow as an instructional video. And when I started this YouTube channel, which was a few years after my production company, it was just kind of ingrained in everything that I shot, so I continued with the 30 frames per second. Recently, I've been switching to shooting 24 frames per second on my adventure films. I made a clear choice that I wanted to try 24 again and see if I wanted to switch back to using 24 for my YouTube channel here. So I came up with 4 different questions and a few tests to look at the difference between 30 and 24. Now, to look at the footage accurately, one of the things that I needed to do was put 24p footage in a 24p timeline, and the same with 30p in a 30p timeline, and watch them back in their native formats in their native timeline. I'll put a link to some unlisted videos here on my channel that show a 24p video in 24p timeline, a 30p in a 30p timeline. And after you're done watching this video, I want you to take those 2 videos, play them simultaneously on your monitor side by side, split your monitor in half, have 24p on one side, 30 on the other. And I want you to watch these side by side so you can see one shot versus the other and really see how they play out next to each other. All right, so the first thing I wanted to dig into was shutter angle and how the motion blur changes if you're shooting 24p at 1/50th or 30p at 1/60th. Now, if you don't understand what the 180-degree rule is, basically there's this standard in cinema that says you want to shoot at double that of your frame rate. Back in the old days when we were shooting on film cameras, there was a rotating disc. And when that disc was cut in half and you let half of it rotate to expose the film, that was 180 degrees, and that's how much time the film was exposed to light. And what that does is it gives you a certain amount of motion blur. Motion blur is what you see here. And that 180 degrees has become basically the standard, and it just feels natural when you're watching a video. Now, you would speed up your shutter speed or shutter angle if you want to have a really frantic or jittery style, or you would slow it down, and then everything will become dreamy and you'll have these kind of trails following. So 180 degrees is basically the standard. And personally, when I watch videos that are shot with a higher shutter speed, it actually pulls me out of the video because it's a little jarring on the eyes, because what happens is there's no motion blur, so you see every frame and it becomes very like tick, 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 and it just becomes very jittery. So for this first test, I'm looking at motion blur with a difference between 24p and 30p. And I did the same circle test that Gerald and Dud did. We actually have the same drill even. So I had this drill spinning at a consistent speed. I shot it in 24p, 1/50th, at 30p, 1/60th. Now, when you lay these 2 images over each other at the same moment, you can see that the motion blur is almost identical. So if you're shooting at the 180-degree rule, 24 versus 30, you're actually getting the exact same motion blur. So the difference in those 2 styles of shooting has nothing to do with motion blur, and it has everything to do with the 6 extra frames that you're getting in the 30p mode. Now, the second question has to do with your shutter speed. So if your shutter speed or shutter angle is cranked too high, is it gonna have an effect differently on 24 versus 30? And the answer is no. I mean, you could see from this footage here, if you have the shutter cranked up higher, it doesn't matter what timeline you have it on, it's gonna look like a series of freeze frames and it's not gonna look natural. There's no motion blur. Now, when it comes to slow motion, This is also similar. If you crank up your shutter too high past the 180-degree rule, again, your freeze frames and it does become a little bit more choppy, even if you are shooting at high frame rates and slowing down the footage. So the 180-degree rule is important if you want your footage to feel natural for a video audience, just because we've become so accustomed to seeing this 180-degree style of motion blur with everything that's out there. So question number 3 goes into styles of shots. And does that change your experience as the viewer? So I shot a tripod shot, a vlog style shot, a panning shot with handheld, some other handheld footage. And what I found when testing them side by side is that when you're shooting vlog style content, when you're shooting lots of movement, lots of handheld jerkiness, the 24p footage played back in a 24p timeline becomes a little bit more dizzy feeling. And I actually asked my wife to come in here. I didn't tell her what was the difference between the two shots. And I asked her, what do you think about this? And instantly she said, shot B makes me feel dizzy. And that was the 24p. And I was showing this footage here where it was like spinning around. And what I've noticed is on YouTube, if you're shooting that style of content where it's like handheld walking around and you're shot in 24p, it has this extra kind of jerky, busy kind of distortion to it. And it does come off a little bit more dizzying. So after I did my test, I went on YouTube, I found different creators that I know shoot in 24 versus ones that shoot in 30. And I was watching footage side by side, and you can really see this difference between the vlog style content between the two. It actually looks a lot better shooting vlog style content in 30p because the background's not as jarring. There's not as much movement happening. Now, when shooting just a basic tripod shot and you're doing like a pan, between the two, there's not major difference. The 24p looks great, the 30p looks great. However, one thing I noticed is that on the 30p, any sort of like bumper movement is actually more noticeable. On the 24p, there is a little bit more of a jerky feel to it because there's less frames. So if there is like a little bump or a little movement, it's actually not as noticeable. So you can get away with a little bit more errors when you're shooting 24 frames versus 30, which looks so crisp and clear. So like a pan, when you're shooting in 30 frames per second, needs to be perfect. Otherwise you see all those little tiny errors. Now, when I'm shooting my daughter in this shot here, the 24p footage actually looks really good. And I was surprised at how much of a difference there is when you look at them side by side. Now the 30p also looks great, but I'm going to be honest, when you're watching the 24p footage back side by side, it does have more of this cinematic quality that we associate with movies. I think overall, when I've been comparing these two shots, the 30p just feels more clear. Like it feels like more of a window into what I'm watching. And yes, some people might associate that with that video-y or soap opera feeling, but I don't think you really get into the soap opera feel until you're pushing the 60p. That to me looks a little bit too unnatural, whereas 30p is a good mix between the 60 and the 24. It's not as jerky as the 24, so it's not as dizzy feeling, especially when you're shooting in vlog style or lots of motion going on, but it's also not so clear that it looks like the soap opera window into like reality. You still have some sort of barrier where there is this feeling that it is a video that you're watching versus looking through a window. One other thing that we need to consider is your screen refresh rate, because your screen is displaying images at a certain rate. And when you're playing back 24p footage, it's doing a 2-3 pull down. Whereas when you're watching 30p back on a 60 hertz monitor, you don't have this 2-3 pull down happening. So that 2-3 pull down actually does cause a little bit of a stutter. And you'll notice this when you watch it on a 60 hertz monitor. So that is something to take into consideration, is the way that people are going to be viewing the content that they're watching. So question number 4 that I had at the beginning is, am I going to switch to shooting 24p for my adventure films or other film content, or am I going to stick with 30? And for me, what I plan to do is stick with 30. And I know that will be not appealing to some people out there, but the reason that I'm sticking to 30 is twofold. One is I personally do like the look of 30. I do think it looks more clear. And two, if I'm shooting a lot of my content in 30 and then some of my content 24, Well, I'm gonna have issues once I'm mixing that footage into a timeline. Basically, what you wanna do is you wanna shoot the same frame rate that you're gonna be exporting your video out as. So if you're shooting 24p footage, but you're editing in a 30p timeline, you might have some weird issues with the footage happening. Whereas if you shoot 24p in a 24p timeline and 30p in a 30p timeline, that's where you're gonna actually have the correct frame rate for the export. So for me, I blend a lot of my footage and I like to pull footage from different projects. So it makes sense to stick with one frame rate and use that for everything that I shoot. And I'm not gonna be switching to 24p for any of my production company work because of the content that I'm shooting over there as well. So it just makes it easy for me to shoot in one frame rate and then know that everything I do is tied to the 30p timeline versus changing out things depending on which project I'm working on. But what I suggest you to do is go down in the description, check out the 2 videos I posted, 24 and 30, and put them side by side and watch them, because that's where I really started to see the difference between the 2 styles of footage. And that's where I was like, yeah, I actually do like the look of 30 a lot more than 24 in certain situations. But I could also see where I would like to use 24 for some of the videos that I'm shooting. Honestly, it all comes down to preference. If you like the look of 24, if you like shooting in 24, go for it. It doesn't matter. If you like the look of 30 and you're shooting 30, go for it. Doesn't matter. If you don't want to adhere to the 180-degree rule, well, throw it out the window and shoot at a higher shutter speed. It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, if you're telling a good story or you're giving out good information, your viewer's not gonna care what shutter speed or what frame rate you're shooting at. They probably won't even know the difference. All of these are just choices that we make as a creator, and you need to come up with your own set of rules of how you want to shoot to make the content that you are creating. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments what you think between these 2, and if you actually see a difference between 24 and 30, and let me know. Are you gonna shoot 24p or are you gonna shoot 30p? Or are you gonna shoot 60p? Or are you gonna shoot 120? Now, if you wanna see some other videos around filmmaking and how to get better looking footage, make sure you check out this playlist right here. And that's it. I'll see you on the next one.